McKellar. I am the Director of the Crime Victim Assistance Program. I'm sure I've met many of you either virtually or in person in the past. It's nice to see you. With me today beside me is Marcy Bensakova, who is the Executive Director with responsibilities for the Crime Victim Assistance Program. And off camera, we have Regan Wright, who will be monitoring the chat, and Christine Spears, who is sharing the presentation and managing the recording. So saying that, I mean, we do want to say to people that we are recording this presentation today. We would the intent to make it publicly available. So for those people who weren't able to attend today, can come back and review the information we're sharing today. And I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join this webinar. I mean, we certainly appreciate and understand that the time that you're spending with us takes time away from the people that you are helping. And we hope that the information that we share with you today is valuable in your work in assisting the clients that are seeking assistance from the Crime Victim Assistance Program. So as a bit of an overview, I mean, we certainly anticipate that many of you are familiar with the Crime Victim Assistance Program. However, we also anticipate that there are some attending today who is not as familiar with the program. So we just wanted to do a very brief overview of the program and what it does. So the Crime Victim Assistance Program is one of the components of a network of support for victims across the province. Excuse me. The program works with other publicly funded community programs that serve victims, but is unique in our ability to provide financial and other benefits to support recovery. And where that assistance is not available through other sources for our clients. We are administered directly by the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General. And right now we have about approximately 50 staff across the program. CVAP is governed by the Crime Victim Assistance Act and corresponding regulations. It's this legislation that sets out our program parameters and eligibility in access to benefits. So, for example, it speaks to who is eligible to apply, the time limits for making applications, the specific crimes we cover, and the benefits and the limitations that apply to those benefits as well. And with the purpose of the program being to assist victims, immediate family members, and certain witnesses, collectively referred to as claimants, in coping with the impacts of violent crime, offsetting some of the costs that result from victimization, and supporting their recovery in process and healing from the trauma. The benefits that we provide through Crime Victim Assistance Program do range in needs. For example, counseling for us is considered one of our core benefits to assist recovery. We also do medical services, equipment, prescription expenses, protective measures, which can include things like security devices, home alarm systems, relocation, as well as benefits to support immediate family members, and with an additional suite of benefits in cases where there is a fatality as a result, and that includes things like funeral expenses and bereavement.
So just giving a little bit of background, no substantial amendments have been made since the legislation was introduced back in 2002. However, we know since that time that the needs of claimants have evolved, and so has our understanding of the impact of trauma on those who experience violent crime. The benefit amounts outlined in the general regulation now fall significantly below current costs. So for example, since 2002, CVAP's maximum hourly rate for a 1-hour counseling session with a master's level counselor has been $80. We know those professionals are now charging significantly more than that. And as a result, we are aware that there have been gaps that impact the program's responsiveness, accessibility, and the level of support that is available from the program. While the legislative and regulatory amendments translate into changes that will impact applicants and are the focus of what we want to share with you today, I did also want to take a moment to highlight that the modernization of the program is broader in scope. So it encompasses a couple of other pieces. One, a largely completed IT transformation project that introduced COAST, which is our new case management system, that will create some added capacity for administrative efficiencies. And importantly, another component of modernization is a commitment to ongoing service improvements. These are things that do not require legislative or regulatory changes, but rather focus on our processes And this type of work will be something that we see as being very ongoing in nature. The amendments we'll be discussing today were informed by engagement the branch undertook, including with CVAP staff. And many of you engage with claims coordinators and others, and we're aware of the feedback that has been provided. Colleagues from similar programs in other jurisdictions, a number of other provinces have similar programs, albeit different from British Columbia's. Partners from across the anti-violence sector who are familiar with the program through the direct support they provide to survivors, including partners from Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations. Highlight a couple of the specific events. They included a support for survivors roundtable session that was informed to develop the gender-based violence action plan. CVAP was a specific topic of discussion at that event, where representatives from a broad range of victim-serving organizations were registered. A virtual engagement session with service providers from Indigenous-led organizations was also hosted by the branch. And a meeting with the Gender-Based Violence External Advisory Committee, which included representatives from the Anti-Violence Association, Police Victim Services of BC, and the BC Society of Transition Houses. What we heard during engagement sessions was translated into priorities for modernization and the proposed amendments that were ultimately passed in December 2023 that came into effect on January 1st, 2024. I'm going to turn it over to Grant, who's going to give you a bit of an overview of the summary of these amendments before we get into the details of them.
The amendments that we'll walk through with everyone today are introduced in different slides, on different categories. So some of the amendments fall into things like eligibility, benefits, claims administration, and we'll pay particular attention to counseling since we know that was a major change that we made and one that people have particular interest in. We're also going to be speaking repeatedly about our transitional rules. We want to emphasize that it's very important to understand that these amendments are not retroactive. They largely apply to applications received where the offense date is after January 1st of 2024. When changes are made to legislation, we must have clear guidance on how and when these are applied, and this guidance takes place in the form of transitional rules. And it's these rules that guide the changes that are applied. Priority in determining these rules is to make sure that it's both clarity and fairness. And most of the changes that we'll talk about today are tied to the date of offense. So those offenses must occur after the date of January 1st, 2024, when the amendments took place. In making this determination for this date, it was considered that eligibility through our guiding legislation is largely tied to the date of the offense, and that transitional rules should follow suit. And in using the date of the offense, it ensures that every applicant requesting support in relation to the same offense receives the same consideration. So as an example, if the transition was tied to the date of the application, this could mean that we have two applicants impacted by the same offense, but submitting application days apart, and one would be treated differently because the application was received on December 31st as opposed to the application that was received on January 1st. There is a notable exception in this that we'll talk about further, and that's in relation to counseling rates. The transitional rule for counseling rate is tied to the date of service, not to the date of the offense. And this means that the increased rates will apply to any services or any counseling sessions that occurred after January 1st of this year. So any sessions that a claimant is taking after January 1st is being paid at the new rates. There's also expanded access to certain benefits, and changes that impact claim administration don't have the same transitional rules as effective as January 1st, 2024. And we'll talk about those more further. And we'll continue to highlight throughout this presentation the transitional rules as we share the substance and the change of each during this session of each of these particular benefits. So without further ado, let's go into the certain benefits that are changing. And we'll start with those benefits that are based on eligibility. So first one is immediate family member benefits. So CVAP's legislation has defined immediate family members as someone who, at the time of the crime, was a spouse, child, sibling, or parent of the victim, and Grandparents and grandchildren were not eligible for benefits unless there was a particular financial dependence on the victim. We know that this was a significant barrier that often resulted in grandparents and grandchildren being denied benefits, and it was a significant gap that was raised frequently during engagement. So the new change removes the required financial dependence, and grandparents and grandchildren will be eligible for the full range of benefits available to immediate family members. Again, the transitional rule applies here. So this change to who's eligible as an immediate family member takes place for offenses that occurred after January 1st of 2024. This change for us reflects a more trauma-informed approach, recognizing the significance of the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren and the vital role that grandparents play in supporting family systems. However, there are some things that are still staying the same. If the applicant itself must be an immediate family member at the time of the offense, that has not changed. So, for example, a grandchild must have been born before the offense actually occurred to be still considered as an eligible immediate family. The next one on eligibility is witnesses. To date, the definition of witness has been very narrow, and most notably has required that the witness had a strong emotional attachment to the victim and that the psychological injury that was sustained was diagnosed by a professional. These criteria for eligibility excluded many people who had witnessed violent crime, including in their communities where the victim was unknown to them. So if we consider an example of an incident that occurred in Surrey in April of last year, when a youth was assaulted with a weapon on public transit. This incident was witnessed by many individuals who were on the bus at the time, but who did not know the victim personally, and as such would have been denied benefits under the previous definition, as they would not have had the close emotional attachment. This new change expands the definition of witness by eliminating this requirement for a strong emotional attachment and removing the requirement that the trauma itself be diagnosed by a professional. This one as well is subject to our transitional rules, which means in order for a witness to be eligible under these new rules, the offense has to occur after January 1st of 2024. And hopefully addressing these barriers will enable CVAP to be more responsive to the needs of those who witness violent crime, but when there's no other avenue of support that's available to them. There are some things within the definition that remain the same. The offense itself must still be witnessed in close proximity, and the offense that they've witnessed still must result in the life-threatening injury or the death of the victim. Next one for changes to eligibility is in time limitations. So the general time limitation to CVAP, as identified in the legislation, has been 1 year from the date of the crime, with some exceptions for minors. So anyone who is under 18 would have 1 year from the date that they turn 19 years old or their 20th birthday. And applications regarding to sexual assault, there's no time limit applied regardless of the person's age. We heard during engagement that the 1 year time limitation presented a barrier to those who are experiencing trauma and often dealing with multiple challenges in the immediate aftermath of violent crime. And we know from this engagement that the Crime Victim Assistance Program in many other jurisdictions align their time limitation with the time limit for civil claims within the province. So this new change increases the general time limit for the applications from 1 year to 2 years after the date of the crime, which aligns with the time limit for civil claims in British Columbia. The increased time limit also applies to minors. So for minors who now have 2 years from the date of the offense, from the time that they turn 19 to make an application, or down to the 21st. So, and again, to highlight the transitional rule for you, the increased time limit applies to applications recurring to offenses that occurred on or after January 1st of 2024. The time limit for offenses occurring prior to this date still remains the length. So what is staying the same? The expectations in the legislation set out that there is one. There's no time limit for offenses of a sexual nature that are committed against minors. And sexual assaults committed against adults, those provisions are not changing. Time limit, the exceptions to time limit, still stay the same. And the director's discretion to extend the time limit if it's satisfied that the application could not have reasonably been submitted within the general time limit also remains the same. So those exceptions can still be made. And moving along, what you see on the screen here are prescribed offenses that have now been added to our regulation. So the CVAP, the offenses that CVAP covers are identified in our regulation. The list itself has not been updated since 2002. And however, of course, since then, new offenses have been added to the criminal code and other offenses have been either repealed or replaced with something else. So throughout engagement, specific offenses were identified for the inclusion in the list of those covered by CVAP, which we have on the screen here for you. The new offenses added to those covered by CVAP protect victims of gender-based violence and online sexual exploitation. These new offenses are also subject to the transitional rule. So this change is also tied to the date of the offense. So meaning that if any of these new occurrences occurred before January 1st of 2024, the applicant will not be eligible because the offenses themselves for CVAP did not exist until the amendments were made. So it's only for offenses that occurred that we can consider these crimes after January 1st of 2024. We do know that this transitional rule will impact those that you support and perhaps be confusing or maybe certainly a little bit disappointing. But we want to highlight that it's CVAP's policy to proactively consider whether the circumstances outlined in an application meet any of the criteria, any of the prescribed offenses. An example I can give is human trafficking has not previously been included in the list of prescribed offenses. However, that offense rarely occurs in isolation, so CVAP has in most cases been able to accept those claims pertaining to human trafficking because there's already prescribed offenses that occurred, and whether or not those were specifically named in the application. And for CVAP, it's the adjudicator's role to determine whether one of our prescribed offenses, and they're not limited to the consideration of criminal charges, so whatever police have recommended or the Crown may have proceeded with is the adjudicator can will make the determination on whether one of our prescribed offenses has occurred. So in assisting your claimants, we ask that you please consider the date of the offense when supporting victims, their immediate family members, or witnesses in making the application. And please contact the program if you have any questions whatsoever regarding whether the applicant's eligibility was considered based on the former provisions of the new changes. We appreciate that there will be questions, and we are here to answer any of those whenever they do arise. Now we'll take some time and speak about the benefits that are changing themselves. First one we'll talk about, and probably the one that is most on people's mind, is counseling rates. So as many of you know, counseling is the core benefit available from CVAP to support recovery from trauma. And it's often the most urgent and certainly the most consistently requested benefit and access benefit across the program. CVAP counseling rates have not been updated since 2002 and obviously fell significantly below the current cost of service. And we know that this has presented a barrier for clients who were awarded counseling but were unable to either access the benefit because they were either unable to locate a counselor or unable to afford the cost difference between the rate that CVAP funded and the rate that counsel charged. And this was an urgent issue raised during engagement, and thus a clear priority for us to change. So the slide that you're seeing here updates the rates for counseling that counsel rates for different professionals in the changes in the amendments that came into force for January 1st. So in determining the increase, we did consult with other organizations in the province who provided similar benefits, such as ICBC, WorkSafe, and the First Nations Health Authority. And in terms of the rates that they offer and the counseling qualifications that they do require, we also considered the recommended rates for counseling professionals where recommended rates were available. The transitional rule for this one is unique for this change, and it's not tied to the date of offense, but the date of service. So increased counseling rates will be paid for the counseling services provided after January 1st of 2024. There is some things that I still say the same, that for counselors that we pay directly, they still must register with CVAP so we can confirm their qualifications and be eligible for payment directly from the program. Those counselors registered with CVAP were all notified back in December that these changes were coming. And we're also notified the associations of what the new rates were. And anecdotally, I can certainly confirm we've already seen an increase in the number of counselors contacting CVAP in order to register now. So we've seen more uptake on that. And we've certainly been a very busy month for paying counseling invoices for January as well. The next benefit that was updated is crime scene cleaning. The maximum benefit for crime scene cleaning previously had been $2,500. And immediate family members and witnesses have only been eligible for this benefit where the crime resulted in the death of the victim. So to improve accessibility, the maximum benefit has been increased. You can see up to $4,000. And the circumstances under which the immediate family members and witnesses are eligible for this benefit is expanding from fatal cases only to also include non-fatal cases that warrant crime scene cleaning as well. These changes hopefully will ensure that better offsets the current costs of specialized cleaning services and protects clients from the physical health risks of additional trauma. Again, there is a transitional rule pertaining to this change, and the increased benefit amount applies to applications relating to offenses that occur after January 1st. Otherwise, I mean, things remain the same with this benefit. It does require that specialized cleaning of biohazardous matter is warranted for us to provide the benefit. Funeral expenses. The maximum benefit limit for funeral expenses had been at $5,000, and it included all the expenses pertaining to a victim's death incurred by eligible immediate family members. And the maximum benefit had fallen below the general cost of funeral services now. So this maximum benefit for funeral services has now been increased to $8,000. And say it along with me, this is also included with the transitional rule. So this increase in the rate is for offenses that occurred after January 1st, 2024. The other eligibility criteria for this benefit remain the same. The benefit cap for $8,000 is based on incidence. So for as many family members as apply, the cap applies to across. Sorry, I'm going to pop on my screen there. So meaning that all expenses pertaining to the eviction and funeral submitted by all eligible immediate family members cannot exceed a total of $8,000. Tied to funeral expenses is bereavement leave. So this is a benefit that family members of deceased victims provide, that we provide an income support benefit, and our income support benefit is attached to provincial minimum wage for up to 5 days of missed work if the leave had occurred within 2 weeks of the victim's death. To improve the responsiveness of this benefit, we've changed the limitation of accessing bereavement leave from extending that 2 weeks to absences that occur within 2 years of the victim's death. And this change reflects a more trauma-informed approach and certainly a more culturally responsive approach in that it recognizes that immediate family members have unique circumstances and that their needs for the benefit may extend beyond the immediate aftermath of the victim's death. Again, this is subject to the transitional rule, so the changes of increasing it from the 2 weeks to the 2 years is subject to offenses that occurred after January 1st, 2024. So, and the eligibility criteria that otherwise remains the same is that we still require information from the client regarding the circumstances and the timing of the leave, and we need verification of the leave from the employers. Vehicle acquisition. This is a rather unique benefit, actually. So this benefit, vehicle acquisition, is a unique and uncommon benefit for us because it's intended for victims who experience significant long-term physical injuries as a result of the offense. As an example, it's when a client then now requires a specialized vehicle as a result of a disability sustained from the offense. An example would be a person who was injured very early in life, resulting in long-term disability. For example, someone who is now quadriplegic as a result, now needs a specialized vehicle. The regulation thus far has limited this award that we can provide this benefit only once in a person's lifetime. And this limitation presented significant disadvantages for victims who are injured early in life. And access to the benefit for this one is expanding from once in the victim's lifetime to not once more than every 15 years. Certainly you've seen this when we've had examples of children who require a specialized vehicle, and the type of vehicle or the access that they need changes over the course of time, that the once in a lifetime is not meeting the client's needs. So for this particular benefit, there is no transitional rule for this. Is we have expanded access to the benefits will apply to any of our existing claims and new claims as well. That for offenses that occur after January 1st, 2024. That's the highlight of the benefit changes. Talk a little bit of changes on things that with claims administration. And this is about reimbursement of expenses. CVAP, our legislation allows for reimbursement of expenses that a client may have incurred prior to the decision being reached on the eligibility of their claim. So for example, the most common example that we have is an applicant starts attending counseling immediately following the offense and then makes an application to CVAP. Then we write a decision awarding counseling benefits. The program can then reimburse the client or pay the counselor for sessions that have occurred from the time of the offense up until the time of the decision. By policy, the program has reimbursed these expenses for up to 1 year prior to the date of the application was received, which aligns with the time limit for submitting the application. The amendment that's been made adds clarity by specifically identifying the maximum period for reimbursement for these expenses, which will mirror the general time limit for application. So for expenses resulting from an eligible offense that occurred prior to January 1st of 2024, we can reimburse expenses for up to 1 year prior to the application. And for expenses resulting from eligible offenses that occurred after January 2024, that we can do it for 2 years. And so this applies, this change applies effective as of January 1st, 2024. So I know I've said transitional rules plenty of times, so I'm just going to do another reminder that we know that this can be tricky. But please always consider the date of the offense and give that advice when supporting victims. There be family members, witnesses making applications, and please contact the program if you have any questions regarding the applicant's eligibility. We'll be happy to answer them and give you guidance as far as what actually applies depending on when the offense occurred. So you can see up here, we do have things up there as far as with date of offense and definition of IFM, all of these things that actually where the transitional rules do apply.
Thanks, Grant, for providing that overview. I'm going to speak just a little bit with respect to the conversation I started off with around service improvements. Just wanted to first highlight that updating the CVAP's application forms to reflect the changes are a top priority. While that work is underway, the existing application form should continue to be used. CVAP staff will make note of the date of offense and the transition rules to ensure that the applications are processed correctly. So it's not something that you have to worry about in terms of figuring out that application form. That's something we will look at on our end. In addition to the changes we've discussed this morning, as I mentioned, the program is committed to ongoing service improvements that aim to look at our processes and strengthen a trauma-informed approach to the work. Service improvements, again, don't require legislative or regulatory changes. They can be considered at the program level. They focus on identifying where and how we can improve the experience of a client through the claims process and where we can improve our processes to increase the responsiveness of the program. Just as an example, we continue to look at refining and adapting the process of and the goal of getting support to folks for counseling as soon as possible. So looking at the interim benefits piece as an example. This work will be ongoing, and we look forward to dialogue with you, likely more informal than formal, as we look to improve the responsiveness of the program and the needs of those that it aims to assist. We do just want to invite and provide an opportunity for questions. I know that we've had some that have come through in the chat, so we'll maybe address those first.